So you finished making your placemat, and now you're ready to quilt it and bind it. So the first thing you're going to do is flip it over and take all the papers off. If you used a nice short stitch while you were piecing it, these papers should come right off. And they say that it's easier when you're removing papers to start from the largest section first, but I don't know if it matters so much. And when you get down into the little pointy areas, you might want to use tweezers. You might want to use that purple fang to get down into the points, but you don't have to remove every scrap of paper. If there's little pieces like this hanging out, it's okay. They'll wash away eventually inside the quilt or the placemat. But I like to get most of the big pieces. There, all done. So now it's ready to sandwich and to quilt. So now you need a piece of backing fabric for the placemat, and it only takes a piece that's about 14 by 20 inches. So a fat quarter works, and you just have to make sure that it's going to fit a little bit bigger all the way around. And here this is a little bit bigger all the way around. It's not cut quite square. You never know what you're going to get when you go to a funny chain store. So I can square it off a little bit. And then you need a piece of batting the same size as the backing. So you put the backing down on your table with the right side down on the table and the wrong side up. And then you place your batting. I'm going to use a cotton batting also on the table right on top of it, and you smooth that out nice. Now I like to turn it over and cut my batting to the same size as my backing so that when I line up the top piece, I know that it's lined up with batting and with the backing behind it all. So this is a little odd, so I'm going to cut it to fit. And now it's the same size as my backing piece. So I can flip it back over, and I have my backing down on the table, my batting on top of it, and now I can place my placemat. And there's a little bit of extra showing all the way around, so I know that there is backing behind the whole thing because the backing is the same size as the batting. So now it's as simple as doing a little bit of quilting on it. Depending on your batting, you might only have to quilt every 4 inches or 10 inches. Some of them are every 2 inches. In this case, where I used the same color, the dark color is a black, and it's the same on all 3 of them, I'm just going to, first I'll quilt down the middle, and then I'll quilt up this sashing here. I might actually go in and do a couple of these spines, or maybe just one spine in the middle of each piece, just enough to hold it together. So if you're not great at quilting on your own, this is a good place to start. You don't have to do a lot of quilting. You can do some straight stitching. And just, like I said, I will straight stitch that piece down there, and then I'll straight stitch across here. I'm just going to use a like thread so you don't notice it so much. And then I'll probably straight stitch a point or two in the middle of each one of these. And then it's quilted together, and it's ready to trim the outside edge and put the binding on. So I'm just going to hold it together with a couple of pins. I'm not even using safety pins, I'm just using a straight pin so I can pull them out quickly. And I only need a few of them in there because it's a small placemat. And that's just enough to hold it in place so I can bring it to my machine and it won't shift. I'm going to go from the line that I just quilted and out to the edge again. And I'm just going down the center of these. I'm using black on black, so It doesn't show that much. It's just going to be enough to hold it together. And I'm also going to hold the edges together. So I'm going about 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around, because my binding will be 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and then you won't see this stitching at all. It'll be held inside the binding. And now there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. So the third point in is the middle one. I'm definitely going to quilt the middle point. And I'm just going to stay close to the edge of the black on the inside. It's almost stitching in the ditch, but not quite. And make sure the needle's down, and I'll pivot, and I'll go down the other side of that point. I keep continuing around here, and then I'll do the third point on this pink block too. So 1, 2, 3, 4 points. There's an even amount of points. But I'll go up and down one, and maybe I'll go up and down the second one. I'll do 2 in the middle. And now the green, I've already gone all the way around to the piece, so I'm going to stop that there, and then I'll go into the green to do those points. So I did this point on the pink, and then this point on the pink, so I'm going to skip this green one, and I'll go to this one. I'm skipping one, and I'm going to the one after that. So I did this one, I'm going to skip this one, and I'm going to do this one. And that's really all it needs. It doesn't need a whole lot of quilting, it's just a placemat. You are going to launder it, so you don't want it to be lumpy, but you don't have to quilt it to death, that's for sure. So preparing for the binding, I want to square it off. So I'm just going to look at how straight that edge is. It's not very straight, is it? So I'm going to come out a little bit, and maybe no more than what an 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch is. I'm just going to square it, leaving some of the batting showing. And that'll get covered with the binding when I put the binding on. So there's a little tiny bit showing there on the edge. But that'll get covered, like I said, with the binding. And then on this side too, so I want to look at the bottom edge and square it against a line on my ruler. And it looks like one edge is going to show more batting than the other, but that's okay because it's square. So there we go. And then we want to square this side. Now it looks like there's a little bit of extra here too, so I'm going to pick a line on my ruler, square it by that line, give it that little tiny bit of extra, and then the last side. Again, I'm going to pick a line on my ruler, square it to that line. Now here it is right up to the edge here at the bottom, but at the top there's a whole lot showing. So I'm going to take some of that floral off in order to make it square. And now I have a square placemat, front and back. So for the binding, you're going to need at least 2 strips with the fabric. It uses about 1.5 strips. So I'm going to cut 2 strips of a black. And binding for a big quilt is usually 2.5 inches, but where this is just a placemat, I'm going to cut my binding at 2.25 inches. So I have to put these 2 strips of binding together. So I'm going to take the first strip and I'm going to open it out with the right side facing up, and I'm going to put it horizontal going out from my machine. And I'm going to take the second strip and I'm going to open it out, and I want the wrong side up and the right side down. This way the 2 right sides of fabric are touching each other. And I'm not going to use the salvage edge, so I've lined it up so that the salvage is past the edge of the strip. Same thing here, the salvage is past the edge of the strip. And it gives me something to aim for. So I'm going to sew from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. And I'm just going to aim for the corner down here. Now that gives me my good diagonal seam. So now all I have to do is trim away that excess, give myself a nice little bigger than 1/4 inch seam, trim all that away. And now when I open up the strip, I can press this seam open like that. I finger press it. And then the whole strip gets pressed with the wrong sides together. Like this, the whole way. So now it's time to attach it to my placemat, my binding. So I'm going to attach it to the front side, and I'm going to do it by finding the center, pretty close to the center, and I want my strip to go past that center point to give me some room to reattach it to itself when I get to the end. And I'm going to come down really almost close to the corner to start sewing, so it gives me a long enough piece here that I can work with. And I'm just going to match up the raw edge of my binding. I'm going to keep the folded edge in here and the raw edges out here with the edge of my placemat. And I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot, the edge of my 1/4 inch foot, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam here. So here I'm ready to start sewing. I'm going to leave myself a good sized tail that's not sewn down, and I'm going to use the edge of my foot here for my 1/4 inch seam. And I'm just going to match this to the edge. And I'm going to stop sewing a 1/4 inch before I reach the end here. And my foot has a marking on it, a red line on it that shows me that 1/4 inch. So when that red line reaches the end of my placemat, I'm going to stop right there. And then I'm going to turn it and pivot off. And now it's time for the corner. So at this point, you're going to take your fabric and you're going to fold it up, and it's going to be mitered at a perfect 45-degree angle, and it's going to be square. The fold here is going to be square to the edge of the placemat. So there we have it. It's folded up. So now we have to fold it back down again. And I'm going to make sure that the top fold of the binding matches the top edge of the placemat. And it should line up so that the raw edges of the binding match the raw edge of the placemat. And now I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam down this way. So I'm going to match it up to the 1/4 inch edge on my foot and do a 1/4 inch seam. And every corner is going to be done that same way. So here I am on the last side, and I'm not going to sew all the way down because I want some room to work with to reattach the binding to itself. So I'm just going to come down a little of the way, and I'm going to back tack and pull it off the machine. And here's what we're left with. So now we need to reattach this binding to itself, and we want to do it in a way that you're not going to notice that it was attached here. So I don't have a lot of room to work with here, so I'm going to cut this piece of binding down right to the middle of this space here. And I can use this piece I cut off as a measurement, as a guide. I can open it up, and I can lay it down on top of this binding. And then when I put my binding down on top of that, I can see right where I need to cut. So here it is again. I have the binding that's on the bottom. It's spread out nice and taut against my placemat. Then I took my end off of the binding, and I can open it up to see how wide that binding is. It's 2 1/4 inches, I know that, and I could measure 2 1/4, but what if I was a little off when I cut the binding? I want to make sure it's exactly what the width of the binding is. So this way I can see how the width of the binding is. And now when I put this piece down on top of it, I can cut it to fit. So it's nice and straight. There's no bumps or anything. It's nice and taut. And now I can put my scissors right in at the end of that piece of binding there and cut that to fit. So here we have it. It's overlapping by the width of the binding, 2 1/4 inches. So now to sew it together, it's just like when you were doing the binding to begin with. You take this piece that you ended with on the top, and you lay it out on your machine horizontally, like this. And you take this piece that was on the bottom, and you open it up, and you lay it vertically like this. And you have to match that corner there with the two pieces. And then you're going to sew from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. So I'm going to put a pin in that to hold it. And then you might want to fold up your quilt or your placemat, whatever you're working on, and put that in right into that top left corner. And we're going to aim for the bottom right corner, which is right here. So I'm going to take a couple stitches, back tack, and then I'm just going to move the pin as I go. And this is the corner I'm aiming for right here. Now, I'm going to trim that extra off. And I'm going to finger press this open. Just use my fingernail. I get a good enough press on that. And then I can fold it in half. And I'm going to use my fingernail and I'm going to finger press this here, the seam that we just did. And then I can check and see. And when I hold it out on my placemat, I can see that it's going to lay nice and flat, so now I can finish sewing it to my placemat with the 1/4 inch seam. You got to make sure your needle's all the way up and that your take-up lever is all the way up before you try to take this off the machine, or else the threads don't move freely. Just for those who've never heard that before. And there it is. It's all attached. Now I can just check and make sure that there's no batting showing on any of the edges. Everything is encased the way it should be. So it's all good. So now it's time to turn it over to the back. And you're going to take your binding, and in the corners you're going to turn it over to the back. And you're going to stitch the binding down. Now, I love to do this by hand, but there are some people that do not. And just for their benefit, I'm going to sew this binding with the machine. I bring it down and I match my fold with the stitching line that I can see that I attached it to the piece with. And this is where I would stitch it by hand. I would put a stitch into the fold of the binding and then a stitch into the placemat. And then and out again, and then into and out of the fold of the binding, and then into and out of the placemat, into and out of the fold, into and out of the placemat. And that's called a ladder stitch. And when you pull it tight, they disappear. So they also call it an invisible stitch. So in order to do it by machine, I have to make sure that that matches up with just the edge of the stitching line. And then I've got to stitch in about 1/8 of an inch from the fold all the way around. Very, very carefully. And I want to do it with matching thread. So you want your bobbin to match, and you want the top to match. So here we are close up, and we're looking at the back of the placemat, and we're looking at the raw edge, and we can see the stitching line that attached the binding to the placemat. So I can roll this over on top, and I want my fold to be just on top of that stitching line. So when I put it under here, under my foot, I'm going to use this toe, it's 1/8 of an inch toe, as my guide. And I'm going to make sure that the edge of the binding is on the edge of that toe. And then I'm sewing 1/8 of an inch in all the way around. And you can use a bigger stitch for this. You can use a 3.0 on one of these old machines. It's like an 8 or a 10. And I'm going to back tack just a couple stitches and then go forward. So I'm going to take it slow, and I'm going to match it up all the way around. And when I get to the corners, I want them to be already in that mitered position. Every time I stop, I want to make sure my needle's down so that it doesn't skew at all as I'm playing with this binding. And we're getting close to the corner. I'll show you how I work that. I cut these extra threads out of here so that they don't confuse us. Let me get a couple more stitches closer. Okay, so here's my corner, and unfortunately I'm using black. Let's see if I can put something under that so you can see better. Okay, so here's my binding. And I've got it folded down all the way to the end. And it gives me a fold here that's already a miter. And if I put something in here, first I got to make sure that that batting is all tucked up in there nicely in that corner. Once the batting's all up under there the way I want it to be, if I hold this right on the edge of my placemat and I fold this up, it's going to give me the perfect mitered corner right there. That's the perfect miter right to the point. And then I'm already set up to keep going down the other way. So what I want to do is hold it like that. So if I can get it to be in the miter the way I want it to be, and I can hold on to it with a pin or with tweezers, I think I'm going to pin it. Then I won't have to worry about it moving while I go around that corner. So I've got a pin in there holding my miter. It's too bad it's a dark color, but the miter fold is right here. And I'm just going to come into the fold and then pivot. So I don't want to hit my needle. I'm going to hand crank that. And I'm looking to make sure that I'm in the fold before I lift my foot and pivot. And when I pivot, you can see I'm already lined up to come down the other side. So I can pull that pin out. And I'm already lined up with the edge of my foot. So that's how I'm going to deal with the corners as I go around. So here I am at the very end, and I'm just going to go over my first stitches a couple times and back tack and cut it right off the machine. And that's the end of that. So let's look and see how I did. So here it is all done, and just looking at it, I can see that I caught the edges all the way around on the front, except for one little spot right here. But you know what? I don't even see it from here, so I'm not going to worry about that little spot. And it's because I was sewing from the back, so obviously I caught the edges all the way around the back. And it's got some nice mitered points in all the corners. I'm very happy with it. So that's how you put a binding on and finish your placemat with a little bit, minimal amount of quilting.